And I'd like to get us started with a quote from the book. Um, from Alexis's book, we cannot give anyone freedom, a tidy package where we know what they should do to make their life good. But the function of our freedom should be to see others as just as important as we are, to open the cages, break the borders, and heal the scars. We will never be able to completely accomplish this. Freedom is a constant struggle, but there's nothing better for us to do with ourselves. Thought it was a beautiful quote and way to open as well with the song that Alexis had cited in the book by the Broadside Singers in this particular version. So with that, I want to welcome everyone into our eighth author session in our New Works series, and particularly welcoming Alexis Shotwell into this space with us, of which it's a great honor to have you here. I have a feeling something extraordinary is going to happen today in our conversation, and really looking forward to how it unfolds. So I'm here with my colleagues Anna and Anthony, and we'll take on different sections of today. And I want to turn it over now to Anna for a bit of a grounding practice to get us started.
Thank you, Adam. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us once more today. Thank you so much, Alexis, for also being here and being super generous to share with us a chapter of the book before the launch. I feel really privileged to have the opportunity to take a look at it and peek inside. And as Adam was saying, since this is such deeply relational book, we felt like it would make sense to start a bit differently in this session and to take some time to do some grounding, to actually be present for one another. So we will do a quick meditation to start. So if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes for a moment, or just simply soften your gaze downward. And slowly start bringing your attention to the weight of your body. Where you are sitting, your feet on the floor, your hands resting. Take one big, deep breath, just to notice that you have a body, and that this body has been carrying you around through the world. And as we breathe, little by little, watch the structures around you start dissipating. The walls that surround you dissolve, and suddenly you see yourself outside with all of us sitting in circle in our chairs. Immediately you are involved by this warm feeling of the presence of the other individual surrounding you. And you begin to expand your awareness outward. The land beneath your feet, holding your weight as it has held countless others before you. And you go smaller for a moment. The microbes in the soil under that land, the mycelium threading through roots, the invisible exchange of molecules happening right now inside your own breath. And then go larger. The atmosphere wrapping this whole planet, the water cycling through clouds and oceans and the bodies of every living thing. The vast, generous cosmos holding all of it. And you are somewhere in the middle of all that, breathing. And as you breathe the same air that moves through forests, that whales exhale into oceans, that the living world has been cycling and renewing since long before us. You begin to access a sort of deep memory, a memory of this experience of interconnection that defines life itself, a memory that stretches unbroken for hundreds of millions of years and that somehow holds the truth that everything always happens in relation. Slowly, you can let your awareness begin to return to your body, your breath, your chest movements, and the sensations of your feet touching the ground. You are back in this room and in this moment, but carrying that memory with you. Once you are ready, you are welcome to open your eyes and come back together. Thank you so much for going there with me. And I hope this helped to ground a little bit. And with that, I will pass over back to you, Adam.
Thanks for starting us in that way, Anna. Much appreciated. So here we are with a preview into a forthcoming book that will be released in November, I think, Alexis. Liberation is Other People, and feel incredibly fortunate to be here with Alexis, to have the preview into this work and be able to start discussing some of what has been probably a couple of years or more in the making to get this book together and some of the themes. The I should say that when I originally reached out to Alexis, it was uh, because of inspiration from the previous book, Against Purity, and I'd seen that Alexis was in the process of writing a book. And I said, any chance you might want to preview, it might be ready, the next thing, and what is it about? Tell me more about it. And she's been incredibly great, generous about sharing that and being in this preview space with us. I really loved the notion as it was shared with me about that the the book is really about the notion that the only durable solutions are ones that are done with others, and it's something that, as Solvable as a team over years, we've been trying to build these collective spaces and experiment with different ways in which we come together in collectives and practice freedom in different ways, kind of is described. And so there's something deeply personal about this this book, and also about our work and as we try to do it. Um, and this, yeah, I want to invite just Alexis to introduce yourself and just to say that, I've heard, I know you're a philosopher. You also are teach in sociology and have this cross-disciplinary work and also work very closely with activists. So please, I would love to bring in your voice and introduce yourself however you'd like to the group.
Yeah, so I always in the Canadian context especially we do really think about what it is to introduce ourselves in terms of the relations and the land that we're on, um, which are also kind of like being in relations of responsibility. So I think about myself as someone who was born in the US context in Colorado on Ute and Arapaho land, which I talk about a little bit in the book. Um, and then lived for a long time in Mi'kma'ki in Nova Scotia, and now I'm on unceded Algonquin land in Ottawa. And again, because in the Canadian context, it's really common to make land acknowledgements. Um, One of the things I really think about in any conversation like this is what it means to acknowledge that history, which is also a history of how I'm placed in relation to colonialism and chattel slavery, which sound like really big things, but actually I do all the time think about how these nodes of like, how do I come to be here with you all? How do we all come to be here? Inform just like what we're doing here today. So I think in a like political version of the exercise that Anna um, led us through, I think about how when we're doing this kind of work, this thinking, it's this way of being placed in our own biographies and then in these bigger histories. Um, but yeah, basically, I'm an academic at Carleton University doing work on complexity and impurity. Um, and I also spend a lot of time doing activist political work completely outside of the academy. And that's actually been really important for me to build a practice. I'm part of a small anarchist collective called Punch Up Collective that's been organizing here for 12, 13, almost 13 years. And I also ride my bike a lot and I'm a functional potter.
Thank you, Alexis. Anthony, would you mind sharing our structure for today?
I'm having tough technical difficulties unmuting of all things. Alexis, I adore the way you phrase things. It's amazing. I was capturing some notes here and probably turned into two thumbs. Our session today is for 90 minutes. I think we've heard from a couple of people that may have to leave early and things of that nature. But it's really into three parts. The first part is like opening questions, and then we'll have a Q&A and then a fishbowl. We will begin with Mentimeter question and discussion, and we're really excited about the questions we have today. And then we'll move into a highlighted dialogue between Adam and Alexis that I'm really excited to hear that exchange. And then we'll open up the fishbowl where we'll open up the conversation essentially to all of us. And then we'll close. We do note that we will only record the first part of this and not the fishbowl because of sensitivity. And we want people to actively engage with Alexis and not be concerned about what they may or may not say or how that may come off. But without any questions, or if I missed something, I don't think I did. Let's get started with the Mentimeter questions. There are two ways to enter. You can enter the code, go to www.menti.com and enter the code 37779426, or you can just take a picture of the QR code and it'll take you there. What do you think, Adam? Should we move forward with the questions? The first question. Our first question is, why do you try to make things better? Why do you try to make things better? What else is life about? Love for others makes me feel good as a person because there's no other way to live. I care. because we are all part of the world, constantly improving oneself. Why do you try to make things better? To be a good ancestor. Sense of responsibility. There's a sense of identity, purpose that I'm reading between the lines here, but I really appreciate all of your responses to this. Any other? So our next question is, why try to make things better with other people? Why try to make things better with other people? Smooth relationships. Potential for impact. The scale is too large for me alone. It's lonely otherwise. Why try to make things better with other people? Educate both parties. I am infinitely curious about all the different understandings and expressions of quote unquote better and that process of learning through dialogue, contestation. Perhaps this is where our learning is most needed, how to be with. We're all involved in the problems. Being with others is the primary work. Why try to make things better with other people? Thank you for your responses. I'm very curious because we can do, be, feel, and act more better together. I agree with that. Okay. Thank you for your responses. What's emerging for you? As we have the questions, and I think you could still respond to either one of the intermediate questions. What's emerging? I would love to hear your voices.
Thanks, Anthony. And thanks everybody for the Mentimeter responses and also the follow-on discussion. And Ruth for being with us in the wee hours of the morning. When you registered, I was like, I hope she knows that New Zealand, this is going to be tricky for New Zealand. So it shows extra commitment. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and spotlight myself and Alexis, and we'll have a dialogue. It'll kind of flow. It'll be approximately 25-ish minutes, 25 minutes, and then we'll make sure to step back so that we can create the space for a group discussion. So hi, Alexis. Thank you again for being here with us. I was hoping we can maybe start with first talking for a few minutes about purity politics, if that feels like a generative place to start, both connecting with against purity, but also the once against purity was in the world and traveled through the world, how this book with Liberation as Other People is really kind of built. I see it as a companion, very much a companion piece to Against Purity. I don't know if you describe it that way. So would you mind sharing a few thoughts, especially for those maybe that haven't read Against Purity and understood your framing of purity politics, on purity and how this exploration opened the spaces for liberation as other people?
Yeah, no, that's such a beautiful question. Yeah, I was living and teaching in this northern Ontario mining city called Sudbury, and I have a nickel allergy and chemical reactions. And Sudbury is a nickel mine, mostly, almost entirely. So I was just sick all the time when I was there. And for that reason and other reasons, I moved. I left the philosophy department and I took this job in a sociology department. And this might seem like not a big thing, but I'd never I'd never taken a sociology class. And in the discipline of philosophy, I was sort of always really, I was working on the kind of knowledge you have that you can't say in words. So your feelings and your bodily knowledge and how those things were connected to race and racism. So this idea that we need to not just change people's information or the words that they say, but also we need to have different conditions for um, presuppositions and common sense response and physical bodily responses for white people to um, transform racism. And so I'd spent just a lot of time trying to convince philosophers that society existed and that racism existed. And I arrived at this sociology department where everyone believed that that society existed, and that racism existed. It was like so it was so freeing that I was kind of flung into this space where it was like intoxicating. I could suddenly think about what the next question was if I wasn't trying to just convince people that society existed. Um, and then what happened very quickly and in a way that I was not expecting at all was that I started writing this book about the problems with purity politics. And a lot of that came out of doing work in my first book about especially white people trying to do anti-racist practice and seeing the ways that people would aim to say the perfect thing, or get really terrified of doing anything in case they said the wrong thing or did the wrong thing. And really feeling like that impulse to try to be perfect and not fuck it up was actually directly impacting the possibility of people doing work. So that especially white people engaged in anti-racism often would, and this is like, I'm not talking about those other white people over there. Like I often saw this in myself, that there were times where I would prefer to do nothing than to do something wrong. And I thought, this is a problem. Um, and it was also at the beginning, and I just could not have predicted RFK or where things were going to go. But it was sort of at the beginning of some of the upsurge of anti-vax impulses and skepticism about science, um, and simultaneously a moment in this was like in 2014, 2015, where people were really beginning to recognize that climate change was real and pollution was everywhere, and responding to those realities by just trying to keep themselves safe or keep their kids safe. Um, so I wrote this book that was basically about like all of those things together, the idea that you can have a body that is detoxified and innocent of implication, that you can never mess up, and that's the right way to go. That all of these things were um, big problems if we care about the idea that the world should continue and people should flourish collectively in it. Um, so, yeah, so I wrote this book Against Purity from that impulse. And, but I really did write it still as though maybe like 16 philosophers would read it in the world. And then it just had a much broader readership than I ever expected. And so a number of people would bring me to come talk to like art happenings or, community spaces. And there were two things that always happened. One was people saying like, I didn't understand, why did you need to talk about normativity? Which I was like, yes, I absolutely maybe wouldn't have if I thought of all the people that would be reading it for whom that's not a relevant category. But also a big thing that I do in the book is say ethics at the scale of the individual is not going to solve the level of problems that we're at. Like individual behavior, like we can be the best recyclers in the world. We can eat only organic blueberries, and we're still going to be full of microplastics, and we're not going to solve climate change. Like none of the problems that we have collective responses. And I thought that was a pretty simple thing to say, that the antidote to purity politics is collectivity. But over and over again, I had people really say, I don't actually know what that means. And so then I spent a lot of years, about eight, um, writing some work, papers that became the chapters of this book that were basically just trying to fill in the gaps that Against Purity opened. Um, and 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 this book is an attempt to say, like, what is collectivity and why is it great? Um, so yeah, I definitely think about this book as a companion volume and a addendum, postscript, corrective. Yeah,
Sometimes binaries are really helpful to be able to, at least for me, to understand my own interpretations. And so I think it was maybe on this podcast that I was listening to in an interview where you said the opposite of purity politics is not toxicity. I think he used even the language to go another word to collectivity, which was entanglement, the ecological word
yeah,
entanglement. And to me, that setting up that understanding of this binary relationship that I think that many people were drawing, like this, okay, well, the opposite of purity is toxicity. And it was incredibly relieving, I think, to me to say no, 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 that's actually toxicity isn't it. It's not actually the focus.
yeah,
And yet toxicity is a massive collective problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I was just recently in Buffalo, New York, in the US, and it was so beautiful to be there. It was for this conference on toxicity. And Buffalo is the reason that in the US there are these Superfund sites, so places where there's been an acknowledgement that people can't live in these places and there needs to be massive, intense remediation. And Western New York in general, because it was this hub of industry, is also a hub of environmental justice. And while I was there and looking at, some of the places where, like Love Canal, which is this place that was built to be a site of industry, a canal, like they dug it and then filled it in later decades with just barrels and barrels and barrels of toxic waste, and then covered the toxic waste up and then sold it to the school board. Um, the the people there have spent all this time really reckoning with what it means to say we can't live here, no one can live here, and yet we are still responsible for it. Um, and really one of the things that I came to in thinking about that is this question of like, what does it mean for us to actually love toxicity? Not as like, yay, toxicity, it's really great, but if we actually take seriously that we need to love the world that we're in order to say how we want to change it, it doesn't work to just pretend that like Buffalo, New York doesn't exist and no one should live there. Um, so I've been spending also a lot of time working on some stuff that isn't in this book about, like when we buy anything, one of the things we're doing is actively participating in the production of all of these chemicals, that are so we're always in the middle of it. And there's some quality of saying, I love this world, although it is toxic in its actual being, that's part of what we're doing. We're orienting differently toward toxicity than pretending that we can be separate from it. when it's inside us and we're inside it. So we need some other way.
Yeah, I hear it as a kind of call for intimacy with toxicity that is, on the face of it, entirely repellent,
Yeah.
but also the it makes in the I relationship to that question, it makes me um, question the very nature of my own degrees of separation, which is exactly, I think, what you're calling upon. And you make the point too that, um, which I think is a really important one, to be able to talk about sharing responsibility is not the same as us all having equal responsibility. And
Right.
so obviously, if you are living in Buffalo and you're living on top of a Superfund site, responsibility looks really different because of what you share in your proximity to that toxicity than me sitting in Vancouver, um, talking about how do I actually work to enable better choices for the people in Buffalo.
Yeah, exactly. And there's that impulse. So I talk about this a little bit in Liberation as Other People, that it often happens when someone points out a problem that the people who would have to pay to fix the problem or to repair or to that they say, "Oh, you care about climate change. How come you're driving that car? How come you're taking that plane trip?" Or you think that uh, polyvinyl chloride is a problem? Well, I noticed that you bought a cucumber that was wrapped in polyvinyl chloride. How dare you? So there's an impulse to endlessly complexify things and to make it be that everyone's responsibility is the same, and that if you're implicated in anything, you basically have no standing to oppose anything. So I think that there's two things that are really important there, that um, differential uh, differentials in power actually imply that people have different responsibilities to address things. So it's not about implication in the sense of like I'm involved, I'm using something. We could say that the person who's in charge of the like Home Depot, who has been, the people have been petitioning and agitating to have them stop using polyvinyl chloride in their plastics. And it could be that the CEO of Home Depot doesn't actually use any polyvinyl chloride in his own life at all. He's like a plastic free guy. I don't know actually anything about him. Um, but it wouldn't matter if he personally wasn't using any of it. What would matter is that he has the capacity to change the purchasing decisions and the of what kind of plastic Home Depot uses in its packaging of its branded tools. So it is really so cheesy to just be like, with power comes responsibility, but it's true that the distribution of responsibility doesn't track the distribution of use, actually. It tracks power and who has the capacity to change decisions. Um, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is just really a piece that I take from my like continual and constant critique of purity politics is that it's always useful for us to notice when people are invoking purity politics and our implication in things that we think are wrong as a way to demobilize us, right? So to say, well, you're implicated, therefore you can't critique. And I'm always really interested in this sense that we can say, no, no, it's because I care about climate change and because I have to drive a car to get to work that I have standing to say we shouldn't all have to drive cars to get to work. We should have free public transit, right? It's because like it's because I'm implicated that I can take a stand against the things that I am involved with. So it really flips that, right? Because I'm entangled, I uh, can make a claim.
Yeah, that was both now and when I originally read it, that was a very profound realization for me. the being implicated in it gives me the standing to actually make a claim. Because it's, yeah, antithetical to some of the ways, particularly in the left, as you articulate, we experience being othered or marginalized around our sense of agency and responsibility around certain things. So I really, yeah, I appreciate that you flipped it. I want to, before we dive in more deeply into some of the specific themes, I want to make sure that there's a space to talk about the arc of the book.
Mm.
Because I know we only, for the registrants, we got a preview of a few of the chapters, but I also want to make space. Yeah, I think it's important to make the space for you to talk about the entirety of it, which you introduce in the introduction. So, could you talk about the overall kind of, and you mentioned capacity, and I think capacities are one of the major themes to me of the book. How might you describe the overall themes of the book and its arc?
Yeah. Um, so every time I write a book, I think like, oh, this is absolutely the weirdest book that I've ever written. Um, but this is absolutely the weirdest book that I've ever written. And part of the arc thing is like I think that there is an arc here, which is around which is really about like why it's great that we can only do things collectively, that the only things worth doing are things we can do together. Um, but then sometimes, when I look at it, I'm like, I don't know, guys. So there's the very long introduction chapter that you read, which is about uh, basically this strand coming from Black existentialism. So, a tradition that asks, what does it mean? So, existentialism as a tradition and sort of absurdism from Camus that says, like, what does it mean to really take seriously the idea that we're responsible for our own freedom and that we can't make decisions about the world that we enter into, but we definitely can make decisions about once we do what we do once we're here. Um, so that's a sort of like basic idea that like we can be radically responsible for our own the way we show up with the powers we have in the situation we're in. But partially because I was a student of Angela Davis's as a grad student, I really have been thinking for 25 years now about the way that she has consistently throughout her life talked about and thought about the conditions for liberation. So, the conditions for collective freedom, and specifically this idea that the worst lie we can tell, the worst way we can be in bad faith, is to believe that we don't have the possibility of changing the social world that shapes us. So, I think that that's kind of the kernel of the whole book. Um, and in the end of the book, I talk about Jean-Paul Sartre has this line that's sort of famously quoted from his play No Exit, which is a play where there's a bunch of people standing around and you kind of gradually realize that they're dead and they're in hell. And hell has made this kind of bureaucratic cost-saving decision to instead of having demons torment people, they just have people torment each other. So the line that gets quoted a lot is that hell is other people. And I look at this dialogue that Sartre had with his sort of godson, his literary executor, where he says, people always quote that line, but they miss this other corollary to it, which is that all of those people could have been free together instead of tormenting each other. So freedom, liberation is also in this possibility with others. So this is one of the things that I think there's this nice synergy that Davis helps unfurl around this idea that we can practice liberation together. Um, so there's a two chapters that are about how this shows up for us in thinking about climate change and our implication in wicked environmental problems. So the first chapter, really, this question of like, what does it mean for us to think about repair, about being implicated in horrible evil? Um, and we can talk more about some of the details because that's also some technical stuff that folks here might want to just get clear on. And one of the things I want to really hold space for is just there's this technical philosophy stuff that we should make sure that we have space to just explain and feel clear on. But the second chapter is a chapter that's about learning from a philosopher of emotion who was one of my teachers, Sue Campbell, really about this. It's clear that just giving people more and better information about how horrible things are does not move us to action. It's demobilizing. It's one of the things that shuts us down. There's been a turn in climate activism to really take feeling seriously and to say we're having climate grief, we're having climate fear, climate anxiety. But in this chapter, I look to Campbell's idea that um, we need not these big bucket feelings, but we need to be able to articulate, she calls them freeform, idiosyncratic, or outlaw emotions. So things that are not so easy to put into words. So we might need to be able to have a complicated climate feeling like I feel shame and grief about taking a plane from Ottawa to Nova Scotia, which is something I could take the train there. It's possible. It would take 2 days. Um, but also gratitude and happiness that I can take such a short trip in order to see my dad who's sick. So that's a climate feeling, right? Like I am so relieved that it's possible for me to squeeze this into my life. I feel so awful about squeezing this out of the planet. That's not an easy. So anyway, so that whole chapter is about how do we have more complicated feelings and how do we offer those to each other? How do we be good interpreters for one another's feelings? Then there's 2 chapters in the middle, which are really about in thinking about wicked problems and climate change in particular. There's this move that people often want to do to say, let's just all be like Indigenous people. They haven't ruined the world. And so I'm really interested in how do white people, settlers, not replicate extractivism. So this idea that we can just take things in our knowing practices and our spiritual practices. So how can we build practices of being in relation without putting ourselves in the place of people that we've colonized? Um, and so those 2 chapters are really about teaching ourselves how to be anti-extractivists. Um, and then there's this kind of weird, but I think it makes sense once you do it, jump for the last 2 substantive chapters to talk about gender and sexuality. And one of the things that I regretted in my Against Purity book was that I just did not think that anti-trans bigotry was a really live issue. I thought we'd pretty much solved that. And so in Against Purity, I was talking about um, norms and normativity, so ways of being as something that we could be embracing more as queer and trans impulses. Um, and so a lot of the last 2 chapters of this book are really asking, like, why is just this simple existence of trans people transitioning, so difficult for anti-trans bigots? What is a gender, actually? What are we doing together how does one person's gender affect someone else's? Like, what is the relational response there? So I have a chapter that's about that, and also a chapter that's about in queer spaces, often people have a hard time believing that straight people exist. Um, like often queer people want to just say like, oh, you're having a problem with your boyfriend. Have you considered dating women? Um, and as someone who dates all kinds of people, I'm like, well, just dating women hasn't actually solved all my relational problems. So that can't be the answer. But also, I want to like respect and believe that straight people can exist and that still they deserve lives that are like less constricted than the current iteration of straightness. So, yeah, so there's this chapter that's like about destroying straightness through being on the side of straight people and believing that they exist. Um, so you see, there's not an arc to the book, but I think it all actually does. I believe that it fits together.
Yeah,
So,
you beautifully articulated that. I think it does, and thank you for sharing most books in their introductions kind of walk you through the chapter one does this, chapter two does this. It's just not the same as the way, no matter how well that's done,
yeah,
is getting to hear it aloud. So it was amazing to hear how you put these pieces together. We have not much more time before I want to step back so that we can open space for others to join in. And I think that your point about the technical philosophy piece, particularly around, I mean, I'm really interested in the questions of evil and what you brought in, for example, in chapter one. Maybe I'll let others step into that if it's something that you and they want to go into together. One of the things that I do want to mention before we open the fishbowl was the way that in a way, you've reclaimed inheritance in this book in a very provocative way. Um, that on the one hand, you were talking about inheriting intergenerational struggles, um, also talking about inheriting this the ways that the social world we enter has been shaped by decisions and practices of the past. I think that I hear what you're calling for is a much broader sense of relating, and a freedom in understanding intergenerational inheritance. So I'm curious if you could just touch a little bit on it, and you bring in a lot of Angela Davis's work in the introduction. How are the ways to practice freedom related to to our inheritances? So
yeah.
can you put those two things together for for us here?
Yeah. So I often think about this quote from this anti-racist activist Joel Olson, who died not too long ago. And on his gravestone is one of the things that he often asked, which is, I'm paraphrasing, but what can I do to challenge the social organization of the world, given my power, my biography, and how I'm positioned in history? So, what damage can I do to the structures of racial capitalism? Was his question. And so I think one of the impulses that um, can emerge when we confront how complicated everything is just to sort of try to step back and not be involved. And that this is especially an impulse for people who have that possibility. It looks on the surface like you could just step back, not be involved. Um, and that's really about like what do we inherit, right? What affordances are given us by the world as we've entered into it. So flipping that is really to say, what happens if I um, start with what I have received without deserving it and go from there. So in here, the sense of like deserve is both people don't deserve to receive oppression. People don't deserve to receive benefit from oppression. There's not a calculus where it's reward or punishment, right? All of us enter into this world and we've received the things that are bequeathed us, and that's where we're working with. Um, so so for all of us, however we're positioned, we're placed in relations of inheriting material conditions, circumstances, social relations, and then all we can do is meet them from where we are. So that means, we have to reckon with the traumas we've inherited and the injustices and the powers that have been given us and all of those things. I'm especially interested in people in the global north and white people who have undeservingly and in an ongoing way inherited and continue to inherit the benefit, the ease that comes from other people's oppression. So, um, one of the ways that I talk about this in the fourth chapter of the book is this idea of claiming bad kin. So, for me and for other white people I know, it's much, much easier for me to talk about my ancestors who fought enslavement, and who were critical of colonialism. And I do have some of those ancestors. And it's much more difficult for me to claim my kin who set up, who were surveyors for the railroad that produced Canadian genocidal practices against Indigenous people and that were part of the ongoing anti-immigrant infrastructure of this country through the Chinese Exclusion Act and using that labor to build the railroad. So I have really thought a lot about what it means for us to claim the inheritances that we would want to repudiate, not to say, yay, how great that I inherit the wages of whiteness, as George Lipsitz puts it, but to say, if I claimed that relation, I can claim that as because I'm implicated, I oppose it. So, so claiming my bad kin is to say, what relations of responsibility do I want to practice where I use my unjust inheritances to destroy the world in which I am shaped in order to benefit from evil?
I want to keep going, but I want to also step back and create space for others to step in with you. So I'm going to do that and have some discipline, self-discipline here to create space for others. What I'll do now, if it's okay with you, Alexis, is I will invite other people to join you. And I think maybe there's a couple people that haven't been with us before. So just the way we set up this next section is to try to move beyond a typical kind of question and answer into something that gives people the space to share from their personal experiences some of these questions that are moving them, or maybe some of the things you've shared. So we set it up as a virtual version of a fishbowl, which is a facilitation technique where you would have four chairs in the center of a circle, and you would have a ring of people outside of those four chairs being witness to what's happening within. So we're going to create the intimacy here by just using the spotlight function in Zoom so that we can have four people together, maybe to host a little bit of a conversation. If you would like to, Alexis has a thought about a question to invite some people in with. And so if you would like to join the fishbowl, you can just visually, we're a small group today, so you can visually just signal to me and I'll probably see it, but you can also even better use the raise hand function, which is under the react button in your toolbar. And the same goes if you would like to step out of the fishbowl to make space for somebody else, please also you can signal that to me also in the chat or using the raise hand function. So with that, I'm gonna step back and maybe Alexis, if you want to share what the question is that you might want to invite other people to at least start the conversation around, and then we'll see who wants to join you.
Yeah, so